Right, we're going to kick off.
Okay, right.
I'm Martin from Cooking Vinyl.
Okay, I know
You may or may not be aware we're presenting this series, The Future of. This one's looking at the future of music in London, and which hopefully is a topic very dear to everyone who lives in London's hearts, and a lot of people who don't. We've done, this is the first of the second series of panels we've done. The first one was all about how you monetize recorded music. So we looked at streaming, we looked at marketing, we looked at record deals, that sort of thing. The second series is going to totally change the agenda. We just want to look at actually aspects of music and how, you know, what it can do to make the world better, what it can do that just makes music in London more interesting, how it brings London to life, things like that. And I have no idea. I know most of these people. I have no idea what they're going to speak about. I'm really looking forward to hearing this.
You don't have to lie.
Cheers, Martin. Give a round of applause for Martin. We're putting these brilliant discussions on. I moderated, as Martin said, a sort of set of them earlier in the year, and now we're looking at things from a slightly different perspective. I've been told that if the word streaming comes up on this panel, then we should all drop our microphones and leave immediately. That's not the topic at hand. It's a different area of, yes, the business, but also an area of artists' careers, and a vital area of artists' careers. I don't think anyone who's involved in the creative side of the music business would debate that. Before we get into it, I would ask each panellist, as briefly as possible, to explain who you are and what it is you do that's relevant to the topic at hand. So we'll start with Shane at the end.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Shane Shapiro. I run a company called Sound Diplomacy. We work with cities and governments around the world on music strategies, but the reason I'm here is we are the secretariats or project managers for the Mayor of London's Music Board and the Mayor of London's Nighttime Commission, and we're leading in the creation of a role called the Night Czar, or like a night mayor, who's going to be representing nighttime economy in London.
I'm Julia Jones. My company is called Found in Music, and we run various brands, usually brand-led music events and experiences. And we also run the Mayor of London's street performance initiative called Busk in London, which has the ambition of making London the most busker-friendly city in the world.
My name is Fergal Sharkey. I've done a number of things over the years, from make a few records, run a couple of record companies, work for government, and for this conversation currently sitting on the Mayor's Nighttime Commission, where we are trying to come up with a vision and a plan for what London might look like as a 24-hour city, particularly focused on music. So any thoughts, ideas, suggestions would be gratefully received in the next 60 minutes.
Okay. Stuart Galbraith, I'm the CEO at Kilimanjaro. I've promoted concerts and events for 30 odd years. Our current company, Kilimanjaro, does everything from Ed Sheeran down to 100 capacity club nights, 50 capacity club nights, for that matter. And indeed, Ed is a good example of an act that we first did at Hoxton Bar and Kitchen and then carried through to 3 Wembley stadiums. We also promote comedy. We're starting to work in the West End, and I'm on the London Music Board with Shane and a whole bunch of other people at City Hall, looking at trying to maintain and promote venues within London.
My name is Arianna Ricciotti, and I work for British Land, which is a property developer company. And for British Land, I work specifically on Canada Water, which is a large site that we own in Canada Water. It's about 46 acres that we are about to develop, and we are looking at ways and to bring in more arts and culture offering, among which music as well. So I'm sort of here to learn as much as to contribute from the panelists, because I'm probably the one that knows the least about music, but it's got a lot of interest in seeing how that can wave into developments and can bring new parts of London into life again and contribute to placemaking.
We're going to be tackling, obviously, problems and looking at opportunities in London for music companies and musicians primarily. being a journalist, I want to concentrate on the problems first, obviously. Shane, we hear
News is not news.
precisely. The world is wonderful. You know, who's ever bought that paper? Well, no, they've never done the experiment, sadly.
It's also sunny today, so
That's true. Shane, we were discussing this subject before the panel, and you drew up a couple of statistics that obviously stuck with me. 20 to 30% of recording studios in London have shut since 2007. 50% of performance spaces across various...
And artist studios
across various disciplines have shut in the same time frame. We all know the stories of nighttime venues shutting across the city. Some of them are sort of dilapidated and people have fond memories and romantic memories and over-romanticising perhaps. But is it a problem? Is it getting harder for musicians in London? And if so, why?
I think it is. We worked on the mayor, actually the previous mayor, when he was the mayor and not who he is now, unfortunately. He created a task force, and the task force wrote a report called the Rescue Plan for Grassroots Music Venues, and we found that 35% of all music venues in London had shut, about 85 venues. That's now 40%. We had 88 venues last year. We have 82 right now. We count them. But we have 15 that we know of that are opening. So while we think that it is a problem, we think that we have to think about music venues in a slightly different way. And we're hoping that London can lead globally in thinking of music venues more in terms of their daytime use as well as their nighttime use, in terms of how they work in what we call mixed-use development. So with other things that are happening, including people that live there, as most European cities have music venues next to where people live. And we do need to value music venues a lot more essentially in planning law. So a lot of the problems that have come from why venues have closed have been because of the way that the planning law has been interpreted in the last few years. And I won't bore you with why that is, but yeah, sorry, Julia. But long story short is, the planning law unintentionally, and this is my opinion personally, only my opinion is, the planning law unintentionally, I think, discriminates against cultural venues. Because what it does is it puts the value of the land often more important than the value of what happens inside the building. And the value of the land is often most valuable if it's a luxury flat. Mm-hmm. So and also we have a planning law that allows people who own land to change uses in certain ways. And what that's done is, we're losing pubs, we're losing libraries, we're losing cultural centers, because the value of that land is more valuable with something else. And I think only in the last year we recognized that maybe we need to revalue how we value our land. But we've only begun. So I'm an optimist, even though the people who know me probably disagree. But I think that things are getting better because of a lot of the people on this panel. But we have a long way to go. And if we don't have, the Hoxton Bar and Kitchens or the 12 bars or all these types of venues, the 12 bar we don't have right now, but will be coming back, where is the next Adele going to play? Where's the next Ed Sheeran going to play? And then we champion how valuable they are to our economy. It's complete bullshit that we don't look at the ecosystem that supports these artists. Yes, I think things are improving.
The valuation of land as well is interesting, because you're talking about a building. Yeah. Bring it on. Round of applause.
Well done, that man.
Clearly, the Hospital Club is a venue that can stay, as far as I'm concerned.
Who ordered the wine, guys? Glass of wine.
I haven't ordered it, but I can have it. Won't say no.
So you're getting into this rock and roll thing rather quickly and with some ease,
yeah,
I
good.
see.
I think I fit.
Property developers drink as much as us.
It rubs off really quickly.
All right, I promise.
Thanks.
Julia, before we were interrupted in the most heavenly way...
we've got a spare, look at it.
Yeah, Shane's clearly going to need to...
That goes to the best panellist at the end.
There you go.
You were saying?
I was just saying that in terms of the value of land, we've got, with street performance, it's almost the bizarre situation where you've got a piece of land that has nothing on it except the occasional busker, but the value of that land is greater if nothing happens on it than a busker when you've got local residents who don't want any noise. music is classed as noise, unfortunately. So you've got an open space that, you know, is perceived to have more value if that cultural activity isn't happening on it, and nothing, you know, it's a pavement.
Mm-hmm.
So in your example, it's you know, the luxury flat is the highest value possible, whereas in that example, it's like nothing is the highest.
Yeah,
nothing happening on there is the highest value.
And I think Fergal as well. I think you kind of, maybe you can explain, because I think there's been with the the Live Music Act came in and essentially said to all venues, restaurants, whatever, you can have music, but it hasn't quite worked that way. And
that's right. So this,
you know,
if I remember right, this allowed up to 2 performers. Is that
yeah.
right?
How do you think that's affected it?
Well, listen, I'll give you the précis of this, if I possibly can. Up until 2003, anywhere licensed to sell alcohol could have up to 2 performers without asking anybody. The law changed in 2003 that, in essence, and I'm oversimplifying this, basically said anybody that gives a performance of music needs permission from the local council. Clearly that was interpreted as a bit of an issue by the music industry in particular, being very sensitive, as Stuart has pointed out. Ed began his career in the back room of a little pub. I began my career in what was actually a porta cabin masquerading as a local pub in front of 6 people. You get a porta cabin, put some chicken wire over it, throw lots of cement at it, make it look vaguely Moroccanish, call it the Casbah, and there you go. That was it. So clearly at that grassroots level, the music industry thought it was the most horrendous thing anybody had ever thought of. Government's response was to set up a commission to monitor and evaluate the impact of this new legislation. I spent 4 years chairing the Live Music Forum. At the top end of the scale, things seem to be going okay. The Wembley Stadiums of this world, it was change, it was disruptive, but ultimately everybody had the knowledge, experience, the resource, and then it kind of settled itself down, and it was okay. But where there was clearly an impact was at those grassroots venues, simply because there was a whole new set of people introduced into a conversation. Suddenly the residents are complaining that there's going to be noise, there's no evidence, but you can now object to an idea.
Yeah.
Suddenly the police are objecting because they think, oh, well, these are people that like music and it's all going to be marauding hordes of truanting students, rampaging through city centres, binge drinking and terrorising adults, and local councillors responding to all of that. So ultimately the forum recommended that the law needed to be changed, even though it had only been in place for a couple of years, thanks to a particular gentleman who personally I think deserves enormous credit, called Lord Clement Jones. And if anybody thinks that the House of Lords don't really do anything, Lord Clement Jones single-handedly introduced a private member's bill on 3 occasions over 5 years and doggedly and determinedly kept going, and that private member's bill, against all the odds, became law in 2011, and ever since, any performance of live music in front of less than 500 people no longer requires permission from the local authority or indeed anybody else. Now, has there been the uptake? Probably not as much as we would like. Mm-hmm. I think they kind of get, for me, what's really important is where you start looking at the whole notion of it. And in many ways, the music industry kind of brings about its own issues on occasions. Historically, 60s, 70s and 80s, music industry was doing absolutely fine. If we're truthful, during the 1980s, we could not make enough CDs quick enough. We could not pack enough lorries quickly enough to send them up the M6. So the reality was the music industry just got on with what it was doing. It did it very well, and the rest of the world ignored us, and we were quite happy with that situation. The world changes. The internet's born. That causes a whole thing. The whole structure and the way people look at towns has now changed. There's now those economic pressures. The land's worth more than the venue ever is. The land's clearly going to generate more income for somebody than having 5 kids doing the first gig in front of 12 people ever is. And suddenly you have to begin to question about what is important about culture, about society, and about music. And it becomes a big quite broad philosophical conversation. Yes, Adele would not probably exist or find it a lot harder had it not been for a little pub in Brixton who did a regular bit of an open night gig, where she got for the first time the opportunity to stand up with a guitar and sing a few songs, like any number of us. So you can't lose that infrastructure. So it has the economic thing, music, culture, massively important to the British economy, generates billions of pounds worth of income for this country, but it also, in terms of culture, to quote Oscar Wilde, it simply makes the world we live in a much more insightful, much more beautiful, much more placid place, an interesting place within which to live our lives. So do we want our city centres to be overly designed skyscraper environments with these huge wide open spaces that are devoid of life and meaning and soulless? Or do we want to protect that and bring people into it and give people something to do and enjoy at the weekends, give the opportunity to nurture, support and develop young artists, musicians, performers, and to ensure that London continues justifiably to maintain its position as possibly one of, if not the most important music city on the planet.
Stuart, devoid of life,
that.
devoid of life and soulless. Is that a fair description of the grassroots level of London's music live scene?
No, I don't think it is, but it certainly, while Shane has optimism, there are certainly challenges, and although we've got artists that we work with that we've come to lately in their careers, the vast majority of the acts that we work with are ones that we've worked with right from the very start. And Ed is a good example. Another example perhaps is Muse, where my first gig with them was the bar at Ulu, or Simply Red, going it back even further than that. But the fact is the challenges to those grassroots venues now, I think, are more than they ever have been. So while there's optimism, I think there is still very much danger on the horizon, and whether that be a symptom of Russian oligarchs buying up the centre of town and pushing everybody out, which is sort of symptomatic of the land price issues that we have that you talked about, or indeed PRS, where although PRS is a great organisation, I think it has issues, and even just a 1% rise in PRS will potentially push out of business dozens and dozens of venues, because they're all running on the breadline. And it's one thing to say, oh, we'll waive a minimum fee, but that's giving back 10p while trying to take 50 quid. And those 50 quids over 100 nights in a year on an operator that's really just at break even will push them under. So I think there are some real challenges to grassroots venues, which concern us massively. I mean, the overall health of the music industry, or the live industry within the UK and London in particular, is we're in rude health. And although the recorded industry has diminished significantly, the live industry has got stronger and stronger. And you could argue that proliferation, primarily because of the internet, lots more people get to experience music and want to go out and hear it live than ever before. But London has definitely got challenges, and if they're not addressed, we'll be sitting here in 10 years' time going, bugger, if only we'd looked after those small venues. Look at what's happened. So it's and London, because of its feeding ground or its breeding ground and its nursery slopes, as it were, has got a situation now where we've got the most successful arena in the world. Yeah. The only problem that arena now has is that for producers and promoters like ourselves, is we can't get enough dates in there. And to be quite frank, London needs a second O2.
There was rumours that Irving Azoff was going to do something similar. You know, do you genuinely think the demand is out there for? Yes. If we start at the top of the market, I suppose, and talk about the grassroots in a minute, that we're ready for another a rival to the O2.
Yes. That's the answer.
Who would you like to see running it?
So, I'd like to see whoever's prepared to put in the $500,000 or $750 million that wants to develop it. So
to give the background to these guys, strip me of the exact figure, but from memory, the O2 now pretty much on average sells about 2.5 million tickets a year.
Yeah. 2.3 million tickets.
Which is an extraordinary idea. Yeah. So ironically, I've had the opportunity to, some people who were involved in the Millennium Dome at the time, to slightly gleefully explain to them if there was any question about what it is you do with the Millennium Dome, for those of us old enough to remember that conversation. Well, the answer is quite obvious. You turn it into the most successful live music venue on the planet. Yeah. And it's an extraordinary achievement for London and Londoners.
And it's a lesson too. So it's really important that the music industry understands how important this is to them. A lot of work, so we work with cities a lot, and a lot of our work is just convincing people that this matters, that it actually matters the way your city is changing, actually matters that development over there, and so on and so forth. And a lot of the opportunities in London, for example, are in outer London. Like, well, Canada Water is a unique example because it's in Zone 1. No, most people probably have never been there.
Because there is no reason to go there. And actually, that's the thing from our point of view, is that we look at arts and culture and we realize that when we think, I'm talking from British Land point of view, and and obviously my team on Canada Water that is run by Roger Madeline, who has a great experience with King's Cross. And he has always had this ambition of creating King's Cross as a hub for, culture. Yeah. But there is
the
this
guy behind King's Cross.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he hasn't quite managed to bring it through fully there, though, with King's Place and I think Tiles Yards. I think that there's been an attempt. I think Canada Water is a place where we're trying to explore that further and see how we can, effectively create a successful place. And having conversation with Roger is like, what makes a place successful? And actually, a place for us is successful when people choose to go there. And what drives this preference, why people would choose to go to Canada Water rather than going somewhere else. And we think that arts and culture and music within there, so that sort of performative art, has got an important role to play within there. It's how you manage to bring that in a way that is economically sustainable and viable, as it makes everybody happy. But ultimately, there is also a sort of, I think from an investment point of view, it's the time horizon that you look at, right? Because whether you're there for the long term or whether you're there for the short term, in a way, makes a difference on how people might look at this. Because it's a little bit sometimes like politics can be, whether people really get the long and the big picture, right? So it's what you think is a stake there, and I think it's, as we get involved in places for a long time, and so you think that there is a benefit of bringing in certain uses that can help you ultimately create and generate this preference and drives.
Every time I go to the O2, it really demonstrates the power of music, because getting to the O2 and getting home from the O2 is a massive headache.
Unless you live there.
Unless you live right there. But when you see that music has drawn all of these people to go through that journey to go to a concert, because and to pay whatever the ticket price is.
I think the other interesting thing, though, the other angle where I think when you go down to performances becoming ever more important, there is an issue around flexibility and around management. So from one side, you've got the music industry that has to become, we were talking about it before the panel, in a way, can you look at things in a more of a flexible way where you can have different uses of the same venue? So let's say you build a new state-of-the-art recording facility, but can that be used for some form of live performances so that you activate, so you produce music, you produce culture, but you receive culture as well. So it's not one-sided and you activate it throughout the day. So potentially that starts becoming more interesting. And then, could you put it, does it need to be ground floor? Does it need to be a standing alone venue? Can it be in the basement and then maybe have a projecting screen? So there's other ways. And then who manages it, right? Because I think the management side of these things, it's interesting, but that's also something that can create some hurdles to start putting things into place, because developers are not necessarily experienced doing that. So you need someone that,
And no matter what protections you place in planning, no matter how well you design a building, no matter how many securities you get in terms of planning, the minute that someone complains and it goes to licensing is the minute that planning doesn't matter. But going back, and I guess the debate is about London, is people, first off, most people, I believe, have no idea how much London is changing. So there's essentially Manchester being built in London right now, across London. Europe's largest development site is in London. That's in just north of Wembley. It's called Old Oak Common. There's 3 towns of 25,000 people being built in Barking. How many people have been to Barking, right? 3 towns of 25,000 people. Billy Bragg has. I have. It's wonderful. And we're working on a project in Hayes, near Heathrow, which is EMI's old vinyl factory, where vinyl was invented. Vinyl was invented in London. And my idea of how can we make London better is, and this is an industry issue and a planning issue and a council issue, is how can we diversify our offer? So that, in my opinion, geographic diversification is as important. And as people are moving around London in different ways, I hope that we as an industry will see the value of a venue in Zone 3 or the value of a venue in Zone 4, maybe for that local community. Or it's not going to compete. It's, and my thing, so I live in Stratford in East London, and just by Stratford. And I don't know if anyone knows this, there's a venue there called the Rex that it used to exist. It's an old theater from 1896, and it's derelict right now because someone got shot in 2010 and spooked the council. But it's just sitting there, and it's going to be demolished and converted to housing. And that's a 2,300 capacity venue, and that needs millions of pounds of work. So if anyone has £3 million. But in my head, I'm like, you said we need a new arena. I think we need a new Hammersmith Apollo. I think we need New Brixton Academy as well.
Both, please.
And we also need a couple smaller grassroots venues. And my thought is the solution is think about London in a bigger way.
But aren't you fighting against interests of which you're naturally and culturally opposed, but also bound to lose against, which is big money?
Well, Tim, the short answer to that is no. The mere fact that somebody from Canadian Wharf is sitting here having this conversation.
Canada Water.
Canada Water, rather.
It is in Zone 1, by the way.
Yeah, but the point. Hold on. The point that I'm making has already been touched upon. That the O2 proves, and this is no disrespect to the Greenwich Peninsula. If somebody who lives in N12, what in God's name would I want to travel across London for to go to the Greenwich Peninsula? Well, as it turns out, simply because of the facilities, the artists that have appeared there, the stuff that's going on more occasions I can remember, I have made the journey across London like 2.3 other million people to go to the Greenwich Peninsula. So music can deliver and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm not sure we've done enough as an industry to explain the benefits to people like Barking and Barnet and any number of other places, or indeed at a national level, to governments and planners and planning legislators and licensing legislators, the benefits that music and culture can bring. And I'm not sure yet we've done enough to shout loudly from the rooftops
But when you've got
and change all that approach to planning and planning guidance and all the other obstacles that have been in the past. And it can be done. And by the way, you're talking to a guy who for 4 years chaired a government commission that ended up changing the law 5 years after it had been introduced.
And
Things can happen.
We have changed the law already in planning, a very small thing. Well, the royal we.
Sure.
Person who actually did it's in the back. So, but
Saw you sneaking in late.
yeah, there you are. Sorry, that's the head of music for the mayor over there, Paul. But no, it can happen. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think what's important to recognise, though, and without dwelling too much just on arena level, is that the landscape of venues is always going to be moving. Because while we're talking about the miracle of the O2, the fact is that in its first 2 or 3 years it struggled. The reason that my company is in existence, which was a joint venture with AEG, was to help fill the venue, because we were struggling terribly when it started. But if you look before that, though, there used to be an arena at Canary Wharf, and it got demolished because Phil could make a great deal more money selling it to build flats on. Now the fact is that as part of that development on the Greenwich Peninsula, and with Quintain at the time before Night Dragon, it was always an integral part of it because the dome had been built, so it was just made a use of. But the O2 is no more difficult to get to than Wembley is. In fact, you can get to there are more people that can get to the O2 quicker than you can get to Wembley proportionately. So But I think that it's interesting what you were saying earlier on, though, because our venue's just going to get pushed out. And again, not just talking about arenas, but small clubs. The Mean Fiddler used to be in Harleston. There used to be great venues that were further out. Are we coming back to that again? Perhaps the land pressure is just going to start pushing people out. If London does need a new arena, there's nowhere in the centre of London to build one, because it's just not going to be economically viable. There's a reason that Earl's Court was shut. There's going to have, you were talking about a town, there's another town being built at Earl's Court, which has got no huge leisure facility to it whatsoever. So I think venues will come and venues will go, but so long as we're gaining 2 for everyone that we're losing, we're fine. But so when we start losing 2 and only building 1, then we're in danger of decline.
What about the halcyon days of the Astoria? Are those days completely gone then?
No. A venue the size of the Astoria is being built in Denmark Street.
But it's going to be theatrical. So
it can still,
Again, though, the Astoria only existed as a live music venue, and trust me, I did so many shows there. It only worked because it was a shithole. And the fact is, if you build something nice, we can't afford to use it. A theatre can exist there, and it's going to be 900 seats, and your average ticket price will be 75 quid. But you're not going to be able to go in there and do a £30 gig because it's just not going to stack up. So again, it's been pushed out. And you're talking about the Rex. Well, the Rex is fine, but there's a reason we don't do shows at the Clapham Grand. But the Forum works, and the Shepherd's Bush works, but the Troxy struggles. I mean, there's a finite capacity to London in terms of audience as well. I mean, in an ideal world, great, every sector would have a 2,000-seater, a 5,000-seater, and a 15,000-seater, and a whole myriad of feeder venues that led up to it. But the fact is that there are time pressures on touring artists as well. We can't sit in London and do 5 days. Invariably, we sell out London and turn business away because they've got to go off and play somewhere else.
So the hotels are very expensive.
They are. It's even more expensive to live there as well.
Ariana, I'm interested, and excuse me if I missed this about the agenda, but why would a property developer be so interested in the furtherment of music in London?
Well, I think music as other performative arts, I think for us, and music is interesting within this conversation as a performative art, and is the fact that it can make a place a destination, so it can make people wanting to go to a place, as you rightly say about the Greenwich Peninsula. Why otherwise would you be going there if it wasn't for the O2 Arena? But I think within Canada Water, I think we have an idea of creating a real mixed-use development, which means, yes, it's residential and probably majority of residential, but it's got a significant portion of other uses, which is retail and leisure and office as well. So, you could have 2 million square feet of offices, let's say, about 1 million square feet of retail and leisure, and then 3,500 homes. But that means that you also, not only you have people that will live there, but you'll have people that work there. And I think progressively, at least us as a company, we see value in creating mixed-use development and sort of estates as the others that we own in London. And the idea is to really have a mixed and balanced community. That means that people work and use the space throughout and dwell it in different ways, which is from work to actually, just enjoy. So after work, you just stay there and hang out there. So what would the reason why you would be hanging out there? If there isn't anything to do. Yes, it's through F&B, but what about you're just there? Oh yes, there is an outdoor concert. I just stop and have another beer, and let's go to this concert, or I can dance, just ballroom dancing. Because there is,
isn't the dream of every property developer that people go home after work, watch Netflix, and drink tennis?
I'm not saying that is, because I think that there is I think if you look at it more from an overall perspective, actually, what drives value in the long term, again, is this preference point. So why would an office occupier want to be in a certain place? You want to retain your talent, right? Nobody, you don't find the workspace of the future is not in your sort of Canary Wharf where you just go and then come back in the evenings. It's a maxi sort of exodus and empty it out. And that's the issue, sort of feeling and making it a place that feels a place. Because it's not a place, it wasn't born to be that way, I think. So you need to start thinking about different in a different way. And if you give value to this integration and to this sort of the vibrancy they get from, just getting people together. And I think there is more going forward, this economy of sharing, and is actually sharing facilities also across, demographics. Yeah. And that's I guess the flexibility that you probably have to think about when you think about music venues, for example. So the music industry has to think about that, where, we think about designing with flexibility. So we think about, okay, how can you bring in people that are different ages? Because obviously we all know the population is aging. So, progressively, above 65 will become a more important categories, but at the same time, you still have a lot of inflows into London of young people. So you almost have these two categories, and people tend to stay in London for longer. So you get this, sort of 30-something with maybe starting having a child. So you have these different demographics that you need to cater for. And so you need to think about, okay, a flexibility around that. But then the music, for example, or the performative art, how do you cater for these different audiences, right? Because you can't just think, okay, just have the, one-sided. So how can you bring in, orchestras, or, how do you allow for the flexibility, which I think comes down into the programming and whether you have a venue that can be a multi-form. And I think that's probably the way you'd want to think about when you think about a venue. How can you use it for different things? And how operators can actually, bring in different offers.
So it's active from 8 in the morning till 3 in the morning.
Yeah, no, exactly. How can you be flexible in times? Because if you drive people, so people will go to your to arena for a concert, but then seems everything sort of happens at very set times, which probably works for the industry. But how can you, for example, work on slightly different times, for example, to then, not over congestion the transport, or to make it more suitable for people that live there. So just try to look and push models a little bit out of.
Someone's had their hand up like the whole time.
For that to be sustainable, though, I mean, and Shane touched on this earlier on, you've got to have planning regulation, but also subsidy in terms of costs and rates and charges that makes those venues sustainable. Because otherwise, you're going to build an arena, it's going to do fine, and then someone's going to offer you a great deal more money, somebody like you, and say, I'll build 5,000 flats on it, or I'll turn the pub into a load of flats, or I'll demolish the Troxy and I'll build a condo there.
Not on our watch.
It's, and so, but if the land value is so much worth more as residential, then surely it's down to government and London as a city to make sure that it's actually achievable to run something that's sustainable and economically viable, because otherwise it's going to always disappear.
It's worth more as residential. But if music venues were running a business model that was a viable economic property, then it would have a higher value. And I think that we keep saying that people go to here and people go to there, and our clients tend to predominantly be brands, and brands do immense amounts of work, demographic profiling of their customer bases, and having a very detailed knowledge of who the customer is, how we build a business model around it. And when you look at, if we're talking about the future of music in London, we need to look at the future of London. Who is living in London now? What do they look like? Who are they? There's a brilliant, if you go to the GLA, City Hall did a big piece of research 18 months ago, and it's called Aging London. And you touched on this, about the fact that a lot of people now who are in their 40s, who bought their properties a long time ago when they were a lot cheaper, they can afford to stay in them. They're aging, as we all are, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen.
By the second.
Every minute. But the whole demographic makeup of London is going to fundamentally shift over the next 15 years, and that is causing us problems right now with street performance, because you've got more people who are retired and living in their apartments. They're there all day. They used to be at work. Now they're in their apartments all day, and they can hear the buskers outside their window, and they're complaining about it. And as soon as a complaint comes into the council, we've got to act on it. And that demographic profiling, but it also throws up opportunities of what do you do in the daytimes of the venue. What do you offer multi-use? And there are opportunities about that, but we need to have a much more sophisticated understanding of who the audiences are, so that you can program, profitable business model.
It is the process that has now begun. And it's why I'm sitting here and giving up my time to sit on the Nighttime Commission.
Thanks for
Do we genuinely, as Londoners, want to see London become a 24-hour city? And what does that look like? What does it entail? And then we have to figure out all of the challenges and the obstacles and the planning and licensing and everything else that may need to be rethought about, restructured, overcome, work with, supportive to deliver on that goal. Assuming that everybody in this room would quite like to see London becoming a vibrant, diversified, plentiful 24-hour city. So things about people complaining, they've a right to complain. What do we need to do to work with those people? How can we overcome that? How can we plan this better? How can we take a much more grown-up, sophisticated approach that we've never done in the past, because it was always just kind of happened, and if it happened, somebody got lucky somewhere, and in some area somebody else did. And now's the time to try and change that.
See,
That's the opportunity we have.
The 24-hour city conversation is really interesting because it's all obviously naturally been aimed at the kind of like the later end of the 24 hours.
No,
But
no,
the 24
it's-
hours also includes
It
the
can get through
daytime.
the same whole cycle.
And
There's
so
absolutely no reason why not.
When you look at, over the next 15 years, the over 60s they're increasing by 48% compared to 12% of the under 60s. And so there's an evening out. But they're the people who've got the disposable income and the time. So,
Sure.
so it's
Barbara
like,
Streisand is
can we
raking
do?
it in, isn't she?
What can we do?
My mum
What
saw
can
her
we
in
do in the
Toronto and
daytime?
raved about
I
it.
think the
I mean,
other interesting point
The
that we did,
O2 Arena as well. This audience is driving ticket sales there.
I think that-
we didn't
oh.
touch upon one side, which is obviously, the 24 hours activation. Then you also think about, there is a lot more now that goes into participation. So people want to participate more. So for example, you think maybe people complain about the basket music, but actually what if there was more of an education program actually feels, because a lot of people, for example, that are retired might not have enough to do during the day, or how could, for example, they could participate into music, how they could, so education plays a role there, whether it is for young people, so families with children, but also whether it is for elderly, right? So how can music or any other performative art make use of the spaces that are given to them? So how do you cross-subsidize things for yourself? So I think it's thinking about new models, which is the way we should probably head to, and then you can drive interest of other people. So there is the planning conversation is very important, because obviously without a support that comes from actually an authority to recognize the cultural value of music, otherwise there is a disconnect from the basics. You expect private sort of just start think about how music can be valuable for you, but then it also has to come, there is a cultural benefit that
Well, yeah, and I think people have to understand, we have to look at our international friends and partners and so on as well. So, well, we look at France or Belgium, for example, I would say more than half of the operating expenditure of many venues is subsidized by the government. I'm Canadian, and pretty much any Canadian band that comes over here, in one way or another, will probably be subsidized, except Justin Bieber. But and I used to work for a number of Canadians, and we supported, and I had a full understanding of the system, supported them. We don't have that here. So we look at there's two big questions. One is, how can the music industry be more engaged and the buzz term is placemaking, right? Which is a bullshit term, because we do that all the time. Or place shaping, which is another term. And I
Next
think
one's PlayStation, isn't it?
and play, yeah. But that's one, and then also really understanding kind of a linear path to how to solve these problems. And I always feel, coming from the industry, that we sometimes aren't grappling with challenges that do affect us, like planning law. Planning law. No one on this panel is a planner, far and wide. I'm sure there's no planners here, or if there is, why are you here?
Please identify yourself.
No, but I've become a student of planning just because I'm fascinated by it, and it's incredibly complicated. And there's this amazing story of, and I'm oversimplifying it, but I've learned one of the reasons why we have so many betting shops on high streets. I also learned why we have so many charity shops on high streets. The charity shops are exempt from business rates, right? So that's one thing. But betting shops, this was in 2005, they reclassified themselves in the planning law as finance. So when they applied for, we're going to have a place on a high street, it's a very rigid system planning. So the council couldn't restrict finance because they want more banks and building societies. But betting shops had that use.
They
So-
add so much to society.
Well, no, but you think, so that's been reversed now. Yeah, that's been reversed now. And again, I'm massively oversimplifying, but we think of, and one of the issues that we've discovered at City Hall is that music venues fit in between a number of different uses. There is no real definition in planning law as to what a music venue is. For example, some of them are what's called D2, which is nightclub and late night premises. Some of them are A4, which is entertainment. Some of them are A3, which is cafe, bar, restaurant, and so on and so forth. And not that one would advocate for a use, but there's clearly a disconnect between the two sectors, thinking, well, why are music venues important to the development of town centers? Why are music venues important to the development of neighborhoods? Oh, but in your job, there's no definition. So there's no starting point. And we noticed that, well, that's a problem. If we can't communicate what a music venue is in the context, then how can we advocate that you need more of them? And I feel really bad because someone's had their hand up for like 40 minutes.
Oh, sorry,
All right.
sorry, It's Caroline. Sorry, I didn't see you at all. Please, I was going to say we'll leave the questions to the end, but considering your blood flow issues, I think you should get out now. So please do.
But
She's got dozens of them.
I wanted to raise the question of how ordinary human beings or even human beings in the music industry can affect venues anyway, because I used to work in live. I used to be a promoter. I haven't been for a long time, but just as an interested observer, I know of three contentious things. One is a venue in Northern Folgate, which British Land are doing a massive development there, which has got huge public disagreement with it, and that venue is due to be raised to the ground in favour of large play office building development. So that's one thing. Another thing is Denmark Street. I actually thought the 12 Bar Club had gone.
it has,
So it has in effect. Denmark Street.
but it's coming back.
But presumably not as part of London's massive heritage of Denmark Street. And then the other issue as well is, which is slightly to one side, but I gather the fabric controversy. The mayor's kind of saying, well, actually, I can't really do much about that.
Well, there's
These are all my showstoppers, Caroline.
But my third point really is about there's a qualitative difference to going to gigs at places like the 12 Bar or the venue in Northern Folgate against going to shed tours where you could be in any bloody place in the world, or even tiny toilet shed tours if that's the kind of thing that's being...
I think the question is, what can an ordinary person do?
It's planning,
So-
because planning doesn't allow people to stop large play office proposals just clearing huge areas.
And it gets rid of all the nuisance, it gets rid of all the
answer-
drinks, it gets rid of a lot of
answer the
things that are
question,
appealing
though,
to councils.
What can ordinary people do? I'll start so I was part of a group called We Love Hackney that took on Hackney Council because they introduced a licensing condition. This was a little while ago. They introduced a licensing condition, and in the condition they said, music venues and dance halls are not considered appropriate in Hackney. That was the word in the licensing condition, and more people signed our petition than voted for the chair of licensing. So, and we won. They rescinded the consultation, and they're working. Hackney Council are fantastic now, and they're working positively about. It's a long process, but they're working on developing a different consultation, different license.
Isn't that a classic story, though? That there's a slightly run-down part of a city that a culture pops up into, and music drives that culture, and then developers sweep into it, and they gentrify the culture. That's a very generalised word. But then they start to try and push music out because it's bringing down the gentrification.
Well, one of the problems is the silent majority doesn't vote. No one votes for local councillors.
Yeah.
Councillors listen to voters. That's what their job is. Their job is residents, i.e. voters. And people who tend to go out and enjoy the nighttime economy don't seem to be engaged in that sense of local politics. Another thing is, I think, Farrell, you told me this, is anyone can object to a license hearing. When a bar or a music venue, whatever, is brought up to get their license, people can object, but you can also write in support. And super rarely that happens. And Fabric, I'm not talking about.
To give you...
Oh, we will.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it.
The law encourages that when somebody applies to add live music to the license for a pub, bar, club, whatever it is, that people can put in representations in support of that application.
No one does.
I can count in the fingers of one hand the number of times I've seen people writing to the local licensing committee going, we love the idea, we'd love a bit of live music in our local pub, you have to do this. Conversely, by God, do people get organised purely instinctively because it's live music? Oh no, it's going to be really noisy, it's going to be dreadful, it's going to be chaos, I don't want that. And it is voting and opposing the idea with absolutely no evidential base whatsoever.
That's the same as good news versus bad news, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So if your local councillor, you're sitting there, the police will be objecting for whatever reason, environmental health will be objecting, the licensing staff are objecting, the local residents are objecting because they don't quite understand it, but they think it's going to be bad anyway. And at no point is anybody else in the room, apart from the person making the application, saying this would be fantastic.
Well,
this would be
you know,
really good.
There's no voice
So-
of that.
Listen, some very quick examples. I'm not going to tell you which local authority. I engineered an invite to go and speak to the full council. And while speaking to this council, I illustrated to them some of the more interesting approaches to licensing live music venues that I'd witnessed in my life. And one of those was a council that had effectively banned live music during June, July, and August in any little pub, bar, restaurant, cafe, unless you installed air conditioning. Now, as Stuart pointed out, doing a live music venue in the little room of the back of a pub, it's a fairly hand-to-mouth existence. You're working 100 hours a week, trying to make 18 grand running the place. So you're not about to find yourself in a position to spend 35 grand installing air conditioning in the back room of this pub. Turned out it was one person on the licensing committee, and the driver was, in their mind, as we know, you live in an age of global warming, and of course during the summer months, that would mean keeping the windows and doors open for ventilation, and that nasty, horrible live music would drift out and annoy the neighbours. They did that to 27 pubs.
Well, it's amazing. Like, you know, in my local authority, which is Waltham Forest, where I live, I went to the surgery of a councillor, which is a weird word, and I met her, and she really likes live. She's now on the London Music Board, by the way, this councillor. And I met her, and we got to talking, and turns out she loves pubs, and she wrote the pub strategy for the borough. I'm just a local resident. You know, yes, I'm more interested,
You're the
but
ordinary human. You're the
I'm just
ordinary
not-
human.
Isn't there an element of not in my backyard here where it's like, well, I love it when you've had a couple of ciders in the sunshine and then a band just strikes up and you hear the Rolling Stones. But not in our council, as long as it's not on the road.
Listen, there is, but the reality is the majority of people do not speak up often enough, frequently enough, and loudly enough, and that really needs to change.
Campaign, make it easier for people to engage. Because I engage with things, I write letters, I go to council meetings, I object to things, and I support things.
But listen,
I'm unusual and you're unusual in that.
Okay, but let me. Well,
Pretty
listen. Let me
We're not the ordinary humans.
let me explain this better.
Well, Martin
The
has a
Licensing
question.
Act 2003 has a very detailed process that has to happen. The local authority has to advertise that application. The pub, club, bar, restaurant has to advertise it in the street, in the local newspaper. You, as someone of interest, has a legally protected right to put in your representation in support of that application. And if you want, I will happily help you with that. Or if you find a single instance where that does not happen,
Difficult, and most people don't do it, so just tell people about it.
but listen, it doesn't involve licensing, but where I live, near Victoria Park, in Barnet, in Finchley.
Victoria Park in
Someone was going to knock down a little cottage. Within the last week, there have been 500 planning objections to that application, and I heard this afternoon that that's changed. And that's just a bunch of local people living around a park decided they did not want their park changed. Little people can do very, very big things should they put their mind to it.
Martin.
Ordinary humans can do extraordinary things.
Extraordinary things.
But mostly people are very passive
Yeah.
unless it's something that they're opposed to.
Yeah.
This is really one for Stuart, because one of the big one of the big changes over the last 10, 15 years is the impact of ticketing on the live industry and Ticketmaster and their junior babies coming in, and the amazing amount of data that these companies have about who goes to concerts. So why can't the live industry do something along the lines that 35 Degrees do to actually mobilise people who buy tickets? You've got the names, you've got the email addresses, you've got the postcodes to support local venues, and actually, instead of just focusing on how do we make more money, you know, this is what this is about, focusing on some bigger issues. How do we regenerate and improve music in
'Cause I guess
London or all around the country?
When those 20-year-olds become 40, and then they say, "Oh, we've got to protect the venue," then they'll say, "Well, we enjoyed ourselves."
You've got their postcodes. You know, if a venue is threatened anywhere in the country, you can write a thing like 35 Degrees do. Just send this to your local councillor. Just put, you know, it takes 5 seconds to do a couple of mouse clicks, share it on Facebook. Why wouldn't this be a good thing for all the ticket companies to be involved with the data behind it, so that you could really support live venues in this way?
Right. I'll come back to that, and there's a really specific answer for that. But I just want to pick up on a couple of points here, first of all. So over my career, I've sat in dozens and dozens of license hearings. License hearings and license applications are, as Fergal says, have very rigid criteria. In fact, there are only four criteria that you can object to a license upon, and so the process is very much stacked in favour of the applicant. So the chances are, if you're going to apply for a music license now under the 2003 Act, used to be the Miscellaneous Provisions Act, even if you get turned down, when you go to appeal, you will get it. Recently, and Shane knows this, and we spoke about it when we were in Toronto, I've had the misfortune to venture into your world, which is that I bought an old school, literally an old school, and we applied for planning application to redevelop it into flats and houses. It's a disused school, don't get me wrong, I haven't put people out of education. The process of planning is very similar to licensing, except there are no rules. I was absolutely amazed. And to apply for a planning application for a music venue, I can only imagine.
So you mean with the school you were ready for a big fight and it just didn't?
No. We basically, I mean, the long and the short of it is that it can be turned down for any reason whatsoever, and your right of appeal is minimal. Or your chances of success is minimal, unless they've messed up the process. But the fact is that the people that are making those decisions are elected members of the council, and they have no knowledge whatsoever of any sort of global benefit or economic impact or strategic plan. It's just. And the arguments are, I mean, the air conditioning thing is absolutely perfect. It's just, and that's the reason why a huge number of, in my opinion, having now been through that process, and I'll name it, it's Medway Council in Kent. I would never, ever go to Medway again to try and develop something. And equally, I've got some councils in the UK where I would never go back to, West Oxfordshire, to try and do a live event, because they just don't get it. And so I think part of the planning, the problem, and part of the planning side of things is you've got to find a better way, or council, government has got to find a better way of putting more educated and knowledgeable people in position that are going to make those decisions. Anyway, that's my rant over.
So to Martin's point, you're in event. Sometimes I'm in Brixton Academy and I've had a couple, and I think, wow, if all of us just believed in one idea, it could really happen. But Martin's point is, we've got the data to get in touch with all those people when they wake up with a hangover and say,
we have, but we're legally not allowed to do so. It's called the Data Protection Act. Because unless they have signed up and specifically said, I want to know about campaigns about maintaining a venue in this local neighbourhood, we're not allowed to contact them about it. Simple as that.
Why don't you include that in future ticketing offers? Why don't you try to...
Well, your initial question was about ticketing companies. The simple answer to that is they don't give us stuff. It was
about one ticketing company in particular.
Right. Ticketmaster doesn't give us stuff.
But I also think it probably depends on which venues they make more money. So most tickets, which are the most successful events they sell, because probably they're not so much interested in smaller venue.
They're 3 times removed from the customer.
Yeah.
They're not interested.
I think the main issue that we have to understand, though, is the fact that, to me, it's 2 things. One is music. The music industry is an ecosystem. And that ecosystem, to me, I always see it like a spider web, and you have different nodes coming into a middle. And when we are a publisher, or I ran an export office, or you're a label, or whatever you are, or a promoter, you're busy trying to survive and make a living and do your job, and you kind of focus on that, and you sometimes ignore all the other nodes, no value judgments here. You just ignore all the other nodes in the ecosystem. And in addition to that, second to that, then we do not understand the value of our ecosystem and everything else. The fact that music is used ubiquitously in the world, the fact that music is just a thing that happens all the time. And I think our industry as well, we kind of think that venue's there, that studio is there. Oh, that label exists. And we don't understand that it's not that simple, and that for that venue to be there, there's a whole process that's gone into that, from planning and licensing and working with local authorities and the businesses behind it and so on and so forth.
And you
health
need to
and
go
safety.
there and spend money.
And you need to go there and spend money. And, I do believe that in order to value our ecosystem in London, we have to recognize that it is one. And I think that's just starting. And this is kind of my segue into this whole idea that at City Hall we're looking at London as a music city. And what does that mean? And I would argue, and I think all of us would argue, we already are. But if we have these issues with planning and licensing, then we have to deal with those before we can hold our heads up high and say we are a music city.
I'd pick up on a technicality, but I would genuinely like some feedback. There is the planning law. Sitting alongside that is some guidance from national government to local councillors when they're making those decisions. And for decades, the guidance has always been very clear. As a local councillor making a decision about planning, you have to be incredibly sensitive where there is an existing noise source. If you're about to approve a redevelopment, new housing, flats, whatever, there's existing noise, you need to take it into account, make sure the developer's done something to address it, deal with it. I can absolutely guarantee you pretty much every single case involving an existing live music venue that I can think of throughout the United Kingdom, that planning guidance has been ignored. And the venues ended up faced with huge problems, new blocks of flats, the neighbours are all complaining 5 minutes after they moved in, the venue's then issued with a noise abatement notice, and suddenly they're having to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds in quadruple glazing and soundproofing, trying to deal with a problem that wasn't theirs of the making in the first place, and that the local authority, in making the decision, probably utterly, completely ignored the guidance from government because they didn't know it existed.
But with the
or deliberately did it, and Ministry of Sound is...
and the Ministry of Sound...
Hasn't that been addressed?
In terms of the
Yes and
ministry
no.
itself,
Not
yes,
really, not in terms
it's an
of that,
isolated
yeah.
case, but on a national level, it's not changed anything
So the
whatsoever.
Ministry getting the Evening Standard a lot, and that helps the...
Yeah,
The term that
and the
is
ministry
used-
had the resolve,
we
determination.
are running slightly low on time. I have one question left. I'm going to come to Martin, but there's a gentleman behind me who's had his hand up for about 20 minutes. So I'm going to let you go first, sir. Please ask a question.
I suppose following on from Caroline's question a little bit, and also touching on the idea of the ecosystem in London, and I love your optimism and share it as much as possible, but I think there's a number of people, particularly young people who frequent the clubs in London, who are seeing their favourite smaller venues just being shut down or under threat for a number of reasons. And I work in the music industry on the master rights side, but in my spare time, just as a passion, I've been an independent promoter for a really long time in Newcastle, Sheffield, Leeds, and now in London, and see massive changes in the way that things are operating. And it seems like these smaller clubs at the grassroots level, 200 to 400 capacities, are under threat, and the importance of them in that ecosystem is that, for me personally, the acts I'm booking are small and the audience are required to make that event a success, where breaking even is a dream, or a small margin at least. It's niche, the audience is niche, the amount of people in London required to be there is very small but particular, and it is out there. But the problems seem to lie in so many different areas, you know, council licensing, like we've seen Dance Tunnel close recently, and that's an amazing, amazing venue for so many reasons and people. Fabric for, and it's not been mentioned, but, you know, a really sad misadventure in drug use and education and understanding and criminality alongside it. And then also passing clouds recently for the idea of property development. So
the thing that always strikes me about Fabric when you say misadventure, which is absolutely true, is if those same misadventure had happened with more regularity on a site where people lived, people wouldn't say, "Well, we need to knock it down and start again." Do you know what I mean? It's just.
I think people, my question is, what, you know, the idea of this night SAR, what. So Caroline saying, what can we do as independent people? You know, I think the people that are passionate about it will seek out those routes and methods to support what they believe in. But what will one person do that shares that voice and has that ability to to connect the dots almost?
Hold that question, because that was literally what I've got at the end. But sorry, your second part of the question. You had the second part.
The idea of licensing, of property development, of guaranteeing spaces for people to enjoy culture and that ecosystem of where you're introducing 50 or 100 more people to an artist that they've never heard of before from Europe, where they might go out and buy the record, and that'll mean 50 more towards a sellout of 300 pressings. And it's hugely important in that, you know, what you've spoken about, but how can that one person make, you know, all of those different cogs fit together to actually
listen,
make a change?
Without getting into the detail of Fabric, there's one thing I've seen coming to that I've been really hugely kind of impressed with. If you go in Islington Council's website right now, there is all of the paperwork for the hearing, which will be on the 6th of September. There are almost 1,000 individual emails, letters, notes, all forwarded to the council from the man in the street, the small people, going, this is why this is important and why I think this is what needs to happen, and I want to see this worked at a grown-up, adult, cooperative solution. I do not want to see this shut down. To me, that's the first and only example I can think that I've ever seen that happen in all the 14 years now I've been dealing with licensing. If venues are having problems with licenses, change it. Local authorities, every 5 years, have to review and republish their local approach and policy towards licensing venues. When was the last time anybody in this room ever responded to any of that consultation? Now, in terms of the night commissioner, night czar, whatever you want to call him, is that something, or her, is that something that they can be looking at? In terms of Martin's things about the live venues, I don't know. Is it possible to contact a local authority? I only want notified when you have an application for a live music venue, otherwise I'm not really interested, but let me know about that one. Is that something that this person can help start putting some structure on, coordinating and developing the approach that you could, so there is a more managed strategic approach to, here is an asset, something the community wants, something we like, and there's a positive voice out there that needs to be heard.
We've seen.
Shane, give me a second.
Sorry.
Martin had one question. I'm going to alchemise the two and make them the final question for the panel.
Just a quick response to what you said, Stuart, and then the question, which is that as record companies, unbelievably, we've managed to get Ticketmaster to sell CD bundles.
Mm-hmm.
If we can do that, you should be able to get them to support live venues. But the question is, I had a phone conversation earlier in the year with Julie about buskers, and she really opened my eyes to the attack going on in London against buskers by a number of local authorities. And I just wanted to give you the chance to just say a little bit about that, because it was eye-opening for me.
I can talk about the NISR after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so basically it's what we've all been talking about, but on the street instead of relating to venues, because it's exactly the same situation in that they don't have a voice as such. You know, street performers don't have a voice. We take them for granted, like we take our venues for granted, and people don't stand up for it. So the complaints become this visible force that the councils have to act upon, and people don't stand up. And Boris Johnson started this initiative when he launched the Busk in London initiative to try and protect it, because you don't understand how valuable it is until it's no longer there. And it is a case of a few people making complaints that can make a massive, they can create a massive effect. And so the opposing argument is that a small number of people can make equal amount of noise in support of that, but the people who complain about things tend to be louder. And it's really important that we mobilise, and the conversation that we've been having just now, how do we mobilise people? Because they all want to protect the venues, but no one can be bothered to say anything. So it's whether it's street performance, on the pavement or in Leicester Square or North Terrace or Trafalgar Square, or a venue in Soho or the outer boroughs of London, we need to mobilise people so that they understand the importance, because you do tend to just walk past things. And I have got a completely different example. I have local pubs and local restaurants, and I try and sort of like divide how often I go to all of them to give them all a bit of money. So I'll go to that one, and then I won't go to the same one all the time, because we're creatures of habit and we tend to go to the all one at the same time. And businesses need customers to be able to survive, whether you're a busker with people throwing money in your hat, or a venue where you need people to buy tickets or beer. So it's
Julia may have just given away her answer to this question, but she's going to have to answer it anyway. But I'm going to start with Shane and move across the panel with a final question, which is, there is famously a NISR, not...
There will be.
Oh, there will be, shortly after a new mayor. What is the one thing above all else you want he or her to achieve in office?
Well, I guess, first off, I just want to address the question, and then that's a hard one for me to answer, because there is no one thing, there's many things. But I think we have to, most local, and I'm guilty of this as well. I didn't really understand how politics works or doesn't work. And about a year and a half ago, the term grassroots music venue did not exist in politics. When you told a politician the word grassroots music venue, they're like, what the fuck is that? Genuinely. The fact that this report was written with the term grassroots music venue on it legitimized that term in their heads. And then they thought, oh, this means something. Once it means something, then you start this conversation of, well, because it means something, what can we do to protect it, support it, and so on and so forth. And this has only happened in the last year, and there's been a lot of issues. Passing Clouds, Silver Bullets, obviously. They're all individual issues. There's no one big problem, so to speak, but the reason why I'm optimistic is not to I'm not trying to ignore the challenges that we have. We have huge challenges, and Dance Tunnel's another one. I'm confident that there will be another dance tunnel at some point, and the owners are looking for a new site. I think that the recognition that this has had in politics will create change. But change is really fucking slow. And nothing happens in a short period of time. The term, it hasn't been brought up yet, but this whole protecting music venues from new developments is called Agent of Change, which was a mayoral manifesto commitment. The fact that it was in the mayor's manifesto means it has to be delivered. And that will hopefully add more protection. But this stuff takes time, and we're going to see more issues come up. But that's why I'm incredibly optimistic, which leads to what the Night Tsar can do. The Night Tsar will legitimize this argument. That's the most important thing. The fact that we have someone who is respected in a political spectrum, who can communicate the silent majority, that's, in my head, what I would want the Night Tsar to be able to do, to show that the economic and cultural value of the nighttime economy, the benefits, without ignoring the challenges, but the benefits of the nighttime economy, the fact that NIMBYs are not the only people that live in London, and the fact that we can have as Fergal said, a grown-up conversation about something that we have never really had a grown-up conversation about. At least I've been in London since 2007, and I have never seen a grown-up conversation. You're right, 1,000 people writing in support of Fabric is amazing, and Passing Clouds, there's been a lot of people writing in support of that, let alone the people who were protesting in support of the venue. And we can only hope that Passing Clouds will return in one way or another. But the fact that we're even having this conversation is a good thing. Don't take any of this shit for granted. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we would never have had this debate, I would believe. So, but I've begun to accept the fact that things take forever sometimes to change. In my belief, if we can collectively make things a little bit better over a long period of time, then it'll happen. And I think that we are now recognizing the cultural value of infrastructure in London.
How would you get, sorry to jump in.
Sorry, now I've got to
I don't know if that helps.
but Julia, so the new mayor, soon to be Night Tsar, potentially 24-hour tube, all of these things, what would you want that Night Tsar to achieve in office?
Well, we're deeply involved in the street scene, so street performance, and I think that it already has, there's been a significant change through the work at City Hall of positioning these, street performers and buskers not as nuisances, but they're entrepreneurs. They're small businesses. That our street performers can earn up to £300 a day busking, so that's not an insignificant sort of revenue for a startup. And so I think that kind of validation, again, is what you're saying. It's about validating all of this stuff and making people realise that it's credible, because often it's just sidelined, So that's, for me, it's very similar.
Fergal, same question. What would you like the Night Tsar to achieve?
I remain internally optimistic, if for no other reason that, as we speak, somewhere in the United Kingdom, there is some young person sitting in a bedroom about to create the most extraordinary bit of music that none of us have ever heard. And the Night Tsar, for me, needs to ensure that London can deliver on every opportunity for that young person, both as a participant, a performer, and as a member of an audience, that they do have access to a broad range diversity of a fully fledged 24-hour city, whether that is going to the British Library to read a book at 3 o'clock in the morning, or go and stand in a nightclub with 50 other people listening to some DJ from Doncaster playing their first ever remix. It can be done, and it should be done, because London deserves it. And as a nation, and a creative nation, we as citizens of that nation, we deserve that respect.
Well said, sir. Stuart, same question. Night Tsar, what should he or she achieve?
I think a combination of what everybody has said thus far, but being the voice piece of the silent majority, putting forward arguments that are positive for venues to exist, making, whether it be planning restrictions easier. But the fact is that if you take the Fabric thing is a fantastic thing to hear about, because the fact is that people that spout bad news grab the headlines, and the fact is that we've got the prime example of that. We would all still be European if it wasn't for idiots like that. And the fact is that exactly the same scenario shuts venues, and the silent majority needs to be represented by the Night Tsar, and the Night Tsar also needs to encourage people like Caroline to write and vote and express their democratic right.
Ariana, last question. What should the Night Tsar achieve in London?
Well, I think, I can see the challenges going forward, but I think that the best thing that can be achieved is actually make sure that conversations like this continue and actually lead to some new sort of ways that all these different, I guess, stakeholders can be, brought together and actually develop a model that is actually sustainable and makes everybody sort of somehow happy. I mean, everybody will have to compromise somewhere, but I think there is an answer there, and I feel sort of optimistic. But I think conversations like these need to happen and need to continue in a way that things are actually achieved. I think change is long, and definitely, we got time at Canada Water, so I'm positive about that. But I think let's see if we can explore something. So I really look forward to conversation to just continue and head in directions that hopefully will allow us to explore some new models.
As a final thought, the Night Zone not only needs to introduce the agent of change, they need to be the agent of change.
By the way, applications are open. Anyone's up
You
for
can vote for Fergal for Night tomorrow.
That's a T-shirt.
That leads me to thank the panel. I thought it was a really interesting discussion. We didn't mention streaming once. What an achievement as well.
Hooray! All copyright.
Thanks to Shane, Julia, Fergal, Stuart and Ariana, and thanks for coming along and listening. Cheers.